It's Archie Slaymaker for International Boxing News, and I'm joined with Andy Clarke. Andy, how are you today?
Good, thanks. Just looking forward to a big fight week. Big one coming up at the weekend. I won't be able to see it myself. I'm up north doing a couple of cards in Sheffield and Doncaster, but I'll have a close eye on everything going on during the week. It's these don't come around that often, do they?
Obviously, it is a mega fight. It's probably one of the biggest fights in British boxing history. Probably in my lifetime. We're going to jump straight into it. I'm going to ask just obviously your prediction going into the fight. I know we did touch on it just before the recording, but what's your prediction going in?
I find it difficult to pick anybody other than Eubank. So I've picked Eubank from the start, really, and I don't see how, if you're being rational and sensible about it, I don't think you really can look further than him because even though he's got to make £157 and that will be tough for him, I believe he'll do it. And I don't think it'll deplete him to 60%. I don't think he would take a fight if that were the case, if it was going to take that much off him. It will take something off him. I'm fairly confident of that. But ultimately, he is a middleweight and Conor Benn is a welterweight. And Conor will look amazing this week. I can guarantee it. I saw him at the Intercontinental 3 weeks ago now, and he was about a stone off weight at that point, and he looked spectacular. And he'll just look so healthy this week, all week, because he hasn't got to cut any weight. And that'll lead people to think, oh, maybe this weight suits him better. Maybe welterweight was in the rearview mirror anyway, and he couldn't make that anymore, and all that kind of stuff. But in his previous fight, he made welterweight, and you are the weight that you can make. So he's a welterweight, and Eubank is a middleweight, and that for me is too big a gap to bridge. And then when you throw in the fact that Eubank has boxed at a higher level, also, then it just for me, I can only pick him. I can only pick him. That's not to say it can't be competitive or interesting, but I would be amazed if Conor Benn beat him. I really would.
Do you think that would be one of the biggest upsets in your opinion if Conor Benn does beat Eubank?
Yeah, I think so because he's jumping up two weight divisions, and that's a big deal. As the old cliche goes, we have weight divisions in boxing for a reason, and they must be confident enough, Team Ben, that he's going to give a good account of himself and that there's not any real danger of him getting hurt, or they wouldn't have taken the fight because Tony Sims is a very knowledgeable, sensible guy. And he wouldn't have allowed this if he thought there was any significant risk attached to it. And if it does start to go wrong in there, then I think he'll be pretty quick to get in and stop it. They won't be thinking like that. They'll be thinking that they're going to win. They've trained to win. But if they did pull it off, it'd be a huge upset and massive for Ben's career and probably the end of Eubanks, because I know he said in the build-up that if he loses, he'll retire. And people say things to boost the sales and create headlines, but I kind of believe him on that front because if he loses to a welterweight, a kind of fringe world level welterweight, which is what Conor is, because welterweight's it's so competitive, and he's a middleweight with world title aspirations, then he may as well retire. So I think there's a hell of a lot riding on this for Eubank. For Ben, there's not nearly as much pressure. The only way this can go badly wrong for him is if he got badly knocked out, because there's no way the corner will allow him to soak up any kind of sustained beating. That won't happen. The only way it can really go south for him is if he gets, mercilessly chinned by Eubank, which I know everybody says that Eubank's not really a massive puncher, but he's a middleweight. And that always makes it, it's possible that he could knock Conor Benn out.
Do you believe he gets the knockout on Saturday night?
I think he does win it by stoppage. Yeah, I think he does because I think Conor Benn will go for it. He can't be too gung ho, but I think he will go for it. And a big moment will be when the first time he hits Eubank clean. If he can make Eubank take a backward step and get some respect off him, then it could be interesting. But if he can't, then he's in big trouble. And he won't know. We won't know until we see it happen because he's got good power at welterweight, Conor. But like I keep saying, he'll be hitting a middleweight, and that's a different thing altogether. And I just think over time, Eubank will that greater power, that greater physicality will come to bear, and he will stop him. I don't think it'll necessarily be, but it kind of depends how it goes. I mean, if Conor really jumps on him, and Eubank might just hold his feet then and let his hands go, because that is what he is really. You know, if you talk about a fighter reverting to type, he's an aggressive fighter. He likes to throw a lot of punches, and he loves a trade up. He absolutely does. He always has, as far as I understand it, right from when he was a kid, thrown over to Las Vegas at 16, 17 years old. So he might choose to do it that way, or he might be a little bit more circumspect and kind of work his way into it. And then when he feels that he's ready, put his foot to the floor. I'm not, this isn't very optimistic stuff if you're a Conor Benn fan, but I think it's more, it's perfectly possible for Conor to, as I say, give a good account of himself and emerge from this with credit, having lost nothing physically or reputationally. But I just find it very difficult to see how he wins.
Where do you believe Conor Benn goes with the loss in his career? I know it does depend, like you said, on how he does lose, if he does get brutally knocked out, or he does just get stopped over time and the corner does throw the towel in. What do you think is next if Conor does lose?
I think he just goes back down to welterweight, assuming he can make it okay. And I know it's hard because he walks around at about 12 stone, 12-ish normally. And it's not because he gets out of shape when he's out of camp. He's never really out of the gym, I don't think. So the weight cut's not easy, but I don't think he's ever had any really big problems with it. I did kind of think that he probably would move up to super welterweight at some point, and that maybe that wasn't in the too distant future. But assuming he can still make welterweight, then he'll just go back down to welterweight. In boxing history, you do see examples of fighters step up significantly and then they find it hard to get back down again. That can happen. But yeah, I would expect him to go back down to welterweight and try and make some inroads there. It's tough because obviously that division's, hilariously strong with the fighters they've got in it. But that's the situation, isn't it? And he's not scared of taking on any kind of a challenge. He's never struck me as a kind of fighter who's actually scared to lose. I think he realizes that if you take big fights and you challenge yourself, it's going to happen. And that's the reality. It's in the post for everybody, that defeat. It doesn't mean, kind of admitting that to yourself doesn't make it any more likely to happen. It doesn't mean you won't do everything you can to make sure that it doesn't happen. But the fact of life as a professional boxer is that if you test yourself, at some point somebody will beat you. And it's just a question of how you react to it. And there's no, it doesn't necessarily mean you can gain from defeat depending on who you're fighting. That O is not as important as people like to think.
That is something we do love about Conor Benn. He always goes into the ring, gives it 110%. And even in this fight, taking such a big challenge, many people don't think he's going to win. But obviously, like you said, if he gives a good account of himself, is there really a lose situation here?
No, I don't think there is really. I mean, it's always possible. Like I said previously, the only way that really this could go wrong for him is if he finds himself on the end of a bad stoppage. And I've heard people say, "Oh, well, that won't happen." Well, it could happen. It can always happen. You've seen it in numerous fights down the years where maybe you weren't expecting it. It can definitely happen. So you've got to be, and that's a fact of life. In that ring, that's something that can be visited upon anyone really in any given fight, pretty much when you get to a really competitive level. But outside of that, then I think it is kind of a shot to nothing because, as I say, if Eubank starts to get on top of him and starts to hurt him, and Tony Sims feels like the corner has been turned and that tide is not going to be turned back, then he'll stop it. He'll get in there and he'll stop it. And he'll do it sooner rather than later and accept any criticism that may or may not come with that. That's just what he'll do. So I can see why they've taken it. I mean, I was really surprised when the fight got made. You hear these rumors from a while back that they might think about doing this. I just didn't think that Eubank would come down far enough. I probably didn't think that Conor would go up as high as that. And I just knew that Eubank. I didn't think Eubank could come down below 158. To be honest, then 156 was kind of mooted, and I thought I just can't see him doing that. And then when he agreed to do 157, I thought, well, fair enough, because that is going to take something off him. And for this to be a fair fight, when the bell goes, it's going to need to have done.
That's perfect. Obviously, there is actually another fight down under as well, which not many people are actually talking about this week, with Sam Eggington defending his IBO world title versus Denis Hogan. How do you see that fight going out as well?
That's just going to be a really, really good fight, because those are just two excellent fighters to watch. Hogan is one of those interesting kind of Irish fighters who I'm not sure if he's ever had a fight in Ireland, actually, a pro fight, a bit like TJ Dehenny. They've kind of plied their trade away from home. He was unlucky. I remember watching him against Jaime Munguia, I think it was, in a world title fight. He was unlucky in that fight. He could definitely have got that. I thought he probably deserved to get it, actually. So those are just two really good pros, and that fight cannot miss. I'll be absolutely amazed if that was anything other than a really good fight. It's a great match.
It's with Sam Eggington. He is never in a boring fight. If I pushed you to and you had to pick a winner on that one, who would you go for?
I might just shade Hogan. I think it's a lot of travel. It's a long way to go. That can make a difference. That can make a difference sometimes.
That's perfect. I'm gonna change ship again back to the UK. Not so much a domestic fight, but a massive world level fight. It doesn't seem like it's gonna get made now, but Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua. Eddie Hearn did come out and say in a matchroom interview today, as far as they are aware, the fight is off. Do you have any opinion on the fight, and who do you believe is at fault that being not being made?
God, it's the funny thing these days is that because of social media, we can kind of kid ourselves like we really know what's happening, that we're on the inside of it, because Eddie in particular is always very forthcoming, but ultimately they're still only telling us what they want us to know and what they want us to hear. I'm just not sure, the more I look back on it now, whether this was something that either side ever really wanted to happen. Because when Fury came out with it, first of all, my initial reaction to that was it was just him being mischievous, really, because he would kind of know that Joshua realistically can't fight again this year. But here was an opportunity to call him out, knowing that he probably couldn't do it. And it was a win-win, because if for some reason he did do it, then maybe they could do it. But most likely he wouldn't be able to do it. And Fury could just accuse him of being a coward and a dosser for the rest of his life. So he did it. And then Joshua said, yeah, okay, all right then. And you could make the argument that Joshua did that knowing that Fury wasn't really serious. And all of a sudden we've got this mad game of double bluff where neither one of them is really intending to go through with it, but neither one of them wants to be seen to lose face. So maybe that was it. Maybe that's what it was really all along. And then you've got to a point where you have to you almost have to start negotiating like you do want it. The whole thing's been mad. My better judgment told me that it wasn't going to happen, but I allowed myself probably 2 weeks ago to start to think that maybe it could, because Joshua, Fury offered him 60-40. Joshua said, fine. Joshua wanted the 17th. Fury said, no, it's got to be the third. He said, fine. And you just think, wow, okay, maybe this can get done, but it looks like it's dead now. I think they've made Chisora another offer, haven't they?
Yeah, they've made Chisora another offer. That was what Eddie said. I think today they received a contract yesterday for Derek Chisora, and I'm pretty sure Manuel Charr has agreed in principle for that fight as well. What do you think of those two fights, that Fury could be defending his title against Derek Chisora for the third time, or a Manuel Charr?
Well, Chisora is the better one, because it's a much easier sell. I don't think it would necessarily be particularly competitive, because Fury's a lot better than Chisora. That's just a fact, and nobody would argue with that. But at the same time, it's two big characters. They could get to work in the build up, make that entertaining, and it's two British fighters. And when you've got somebody like Fury or Joshua in action, what we have to understand as hardcore boxing fans is that we're going to watch it anyway, and they know that we're going to watch it anyway. And what they're looking to try and pull in for the pay-per-view is as many kind of floating casual fans as they can. And Brit versus Brit, that you can really talk up, that can work. That could work. Fury against Charr can't work in the same way. Although he looks the part, Charr, and people might laugh at that, but that matters. You think about the poster. It again, for the kind of more casual audience, that does matter. But Chisora's better because he's better anyway. As a fighter, he's better, and as an opponent, he works much better than Charr. I think Charr said the other day, didn't he, that he'd signed a contract to fight a Frank Warren fighter. It could be Fury or Joyce or Dubois. Maybe he'll end up fighting Dubois on November the 26th instead. There's only a week difference, isn't there, if he's got into training for it? But Fury, Chisora. I think Chisora felt he was lowballed when they made him the previous offer. I don't know what the figure was, but I think that was why he knocked it back at that point. So I'd imagine they probably sweetened it just to try and make sure they get it over the line. But this is what Eddie has said today. I haven't really seen what anybody else has said.
If you did have to choose a fight, if you had to put your matchmaker's hat on and you had to be realistic for December the 3rd for Tyson Fury, who would you go for?
I think Chisora is probably the best that you'll do, to be honest, because you look at, Ortiz and Ruiz boxed each other not that long ago. That would rule them out for the rest of the year, probably, and they're PBC, and it's tricky. Wilder's got Helenius. Helenius is one of the few kind of guys who you would probably be thinking about as well. So they're both tied up. Otto Wallin's been kind of popping his head up, hasn't he, as somebody who, he's got some credentials, obviously, having boxed Fury and done well. But for Fury, in terms of trying to build up a fight and sell a fight, then Chisora is, he is the best they can do. Obviously, Joyce would be great, but Joyce boxed on September the 24th, and they're both Frank Warren fighters, and that's never realistically going to happen, that he's going to throw those two in together with that kind of shorter lead time when he's got different plans for the pair of them. So if you're being realistic about it, and people often aren't, they'll just pull names out and say, well, wouldn't that be great? We need to make the best fight the best, and kind of stare into the sunset. It's just, you've got to be realistic about what can be achieved. And I think Chisora is as good as, that's as good as it gets, I think.
Where do you think that does leave Anthony Joshua? We have received news that he could be fighting on December 17th, possibly in Manchester at the AO Arena. Like you said, Otto Wallin's name is also in there. Is it the same sort of opponent you'd go in for? Obviously, it is a bit different with AJ coming off those 2 defeats against Alexander Usyk.
Yeah, his next fight, I love the idea of him taking the Fury fight and just going straight back in as deep as you possibly could. But let's assume that's not going to happen. Then the plan would be that you would take a fight that you are at least 80% certain to win pre first bell, because what you can't do now is lose again. If you lose against Fury, that's one thing. But what you can't do now is lose again to somebody who's not him, basically. So they've got to win. And I would be very confident that he would beat Otto Wallin. And because it's AJ, it would be big business, and it would do well. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, because I think he's been back in the gym and kind of ticking over with that in mind, probably more than Fury, because I think they probably would have had their doubts about that. But there's no harm in him boxing again this year, because he's not going to have to work that hard to get back to fitness, because he didn't box that long ago. I'd like to see him fight Dillian Whyte. I think that's not going to happen on December the 17th. I wouldn't have thought, but I think that's a great fight for him. I think he would win it, but it'd be a big one. Again, Brit versus Brit. People would get really invested in that. And let's say he could win on December the 17th against Wallin, and then box Dillian in kind of April time, maybe. They could do a fairly quick turnaround again, and there's no way Dillian wouldn't be up for it. And he could win that fight. Then, you've got him back in a pretty good place then, hopefully. And also, Eddie's kind of got what he needs, because that's another angle you have to appreciate here, is that he signed him to this deal with DAZN, and then the first fight wasn't on DAZN because of the nature of the deal with Saudis. He needs to get him on DAZN. And if he can get him on DAZN twice, get a couple of wins, and then off the back of that, they look to try and go back into something big. maybe against the winner of, if they can get Usyk Fury made, that's the dream, isn't it? You know, those two fight, we have an undisputed champion, and then maybe either one of them would just, Usyk's not going to want to fight Joshua again if he won that fight, but if Fury did, then he absolutely would, I'm sure.
Obviously, that is the fight we all do want, Usyk versus Fury. Just quickly, who do you think does win that?
I think Fury wins because he can, as much as anybody can, he can match Usyk for the mobility and boxing skills if he needs to, and he will be 4 stone heavier than him, and that's a lot. That is a lot. So I think Fury would be too much for Usyk.
Perfect. What we're going to do now is something a bit different. We're going to do a few quick rounds of questions. I'm going to go through a few quick questions, obviously just with regarding this year, and you're going to have to pick a few fights that have taken your fancy. If I had to push you for one, maybe 2 fights of the year so far, who would you go with?
God, my mind's gone a little bit blank, actually, just thinking back to what I've been up to this year.
Did you go to Wood Conlon?
No, I wasn't at that, but yeah, that would be a front runner, wouldn't it? That would be a front runner, definitely. I tuned into that one. That was a great fight. Yeah, that's a fairly obvious choice. I was actually at a really good fight last Friday, a Southern area lightweight title fight between Conor Marsden and Martin McDonough, which McDonough won with a final round stoppage, which was absolutely sensational. That was a brilliant fight. You've caught me on the spot a bit there. My mind's gone a bit blank.
It's right. We can come back to it. I do have one that might be fairly obviously simple to ask. If you had to pick one fighter up and coming that you do love watching, who would that be?
I do like Dalton Smith a lot. I mean, he's a British champion. He's not necessarily somebody you would describe as being an out and out prospect still because he's got a British title, but I do think he's capable of going quite a long way above that. You know, I remember seeing him in the amateurs and boxing at WSB and against Cuba out in Uzbekistan 6 years ago, and he just looked really good that night. And that was his first WSB contest, and he turned over quite early because the weight divisions got redrawn for the Olympics, and that didn't really suit him. And he had Luke McCormack ahead of him. So yeah, I'd probably pick him if I had to.
And obviously, who would be your fighter of the year so far?
Fighter of the year so far. Well, internationally, it'd have to be Rodriguez, wouldn't it? It'd have to be Bam Rodriguez. I don't think you could really look too much further than him. He's been astonishing. Domestically, I mean, he just had that one fight, but we mentioned it earlier. Leigh Wood's run has been incredible. I remember commentating on his Commonwealth title fight in March 2019, and at that point, you could never have predicted what would happen because he went into the golden contract and got beaten by Jazza Dickens quite comfortably, and won a British title off the back of that, and then all of a sudden he's a world champion, and that fight against Michael Conlon, it was life-changing money for him, I think, from what I remember, given the figures that would be being quoted. And I just hope he gets a really good one next, because I wasn't a big fan of that Mauricio Lara fight because I just thought that was maybe quite high risk and not great reward. I'd just love to see him fight Conlon again. I think that'd be great. But yeah, I think he's only boxed once this year, but I would probably still go with Wood just because over the last 2 or 3 years, his story's been absolutely immense.
It does seem that fight has been reordered with Leigh Wood and Leo Santa Cruz, obviously determined WBA super champion. What do you think about that fight being made?
Well, I mean, it's a good fight. It's just, I just have a hard time believing that it'll actually happen because I think Leigh Wood would more than happily go to wherever that would be, Las Vegas or Los Angeles. I think that's probably something he would want to do because, you know, you don't get many opportunities to do that during your boxing career. Yeah, for some reason, I just struggle to see that actually happening, even though the WBA have ordered it. it just doesn't. It just doesn't really. I don't know. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Do you think that Leigh Wood may vacate, or obviously be stripped of his title if that fight doesn't happen? Maybe go into an interim fight and maybe hope Josh Warrington does beat Luis Alberto Lopez on December the 10th in Leeds, and that'll be obviously two Brits, like you said. That'll be a huge fight next year.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you do want to see happen. I mean, maybe Santa Cruz doesn't really want that fight either because, he hasn't exactly he's not been super active over the last few years, has he? I mean, his career for me has been a disappointment since he beat Frampton in that second fight, and that was 5 years ago now. He just hasn't really kicked on. He's been kind of gifted a couple of titles with some fairly easy matches. He's not really been very active, and maybe boxing somebody like Leigh Wood isn't something that would massively appeal to him. So it could be him who decides that there are better options out there for him than that. But yeah, I mean, Wood against Warrington would be great. There's nothing not to like about that. And I think Warrington, I think he wants one more big one and then done. Reading between the lines of what he's been saying, COVID was a complete disaster for Josh because it just was. People who follow it know what happened, and it just could not have been any worse in terms of the timing and then what actually happened when he got back in the ring. But he's managed to get the world title back. And I think he does just want that one more big one and then out.
Do you think that Leigh Wood fight would be the big one, and then he would obviously go off and obviously retire after that fight?
Yeah, I think it'd be the best one. But he might fancy going to. I know he does fancy going to Las Vegas, for example, and seeing if he can fight, a big name over in America. I know that's something that he would really love to do because he's always brought a huge crowd, and I think that he feels that they would follow him over there for that kind of farewell. And I'm sure they would. Now that travel's pretty much still back to normal now. Although I think I've said that I'm not entirely sure if it is in America or not. I think you might still have to test to get in, but the more time passes, the more straightforward things get. So, I think he would. I think either or for him.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Andy Clarke, and thank you for talking to international boxing news today.
No problem.